Welcome to Casual Friday. So, a few things to update you on. I'm going to talk to you about my trip to Michigan, update you on my current knitting projects, and then yesterday was the first day of the Minnesota State Fair, and I was at the fair. I was working at the demo booth for the Minnesota Knitters Guild, and I took some footage of the knitting that was on display in the Creative Activities building. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, so let's get started. So my mom is doing really well post-surgery. I was able to visit her a week after her surgery, and I was there for most of a week with my younger daughter. We took a road trip together to Ludington, Michigan, and she's doing well. I took all of the knitted knockers that I had made because I really didn't know which size she would need. And I was kind of surprised to see the bra and the camisole that she got from the cancer clinic. They have a little boutique there. And before her surgery, they fitted her for a bra and a camisole. And both of these pieces of lingerie have little pockets inside of them, and they come with a sort of a breast form. It's like a knitted knocker, only it's shaped more like a kidney. I'll put the pictures above. I was really surprised to see that because of the history of the knitted knockers sort of movement, and is that there really weren't other options for women aside from the silicone prosthetic that they couldn't get until, say, 6 weeks post-operatively. And so I was really pleased to see that they have something that women can wear immediately afterwards, and it's very similar to the knitted knockers. So that was interesting to me. If you have a family member somewhere who can't get a knitted knocker or something like that, they might want to look into these bras or find out if their clinic has a similar boutique to the one that my mother went to. So I was really pleased to see that. I did leave her with a knocker that would fit in the bra, but she also has the forms that came with her bras. But thank you everybody for continuing to ask about my mother, to see how she's doing. I really, really appreciate it. So the room that I stay in when I'm at my mother's house has a theme. Now, this is not something we ever did growing up when my mother was in graduate school and medical school, whatever. We never had a house that had a room that had a theme. But the guest room that I stay in my mother's house has a theme. And that theme is lighthouses. And they weren't messing around when they created this room and decided to have a lighthouse theme. So I'm just going to show you what this room looks like. I'm sitting on my bed, and I filmed starting from over my left shoulder, so the wall behind me, over my left shoulder, all the way around the room, ending behind my head with the boat steering wheel. So you may be wondering, well, why would they have a room that has a lighthouse theme? What's the deal with that? The reason is because there are 3 lighthouses near where they live. Lake Michigan is one of the Great Lakes. There are 5 Great Lakes. 4 of them surround Michigan. So it's called the Great Lake State. And it's really easy to find Michigan on a map of North America because those lakes surround Michigan, and Michigan looks like a mitten. The lower peninsula of Michigan looks like a mitten. There's another peninsula above it called the Upper Peninsula that's much more rural, has a lot of national forests in it. But the Lower Peninsula, where most of the population of Michigan lives, looks like a mitten. So if you come across somebody else who lives in Michigan or outside of Michigan and they say, well, where are you from? You might say, oh, I'm from Bay City. And you'd go like that to point where it's from, or I'm from Ludington, or I'm from Lansing. You know, you use your hand to show people where your town is that you live in. It's just something that we do. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is the scale of these Great Lakes. Like there's a reason that they're called the Great Lakes, and it's because they're so huge. Now I know when I travel, not just to other parts of the world and other countries, but other parts of the United States, it's not always clear how far or close something is. You can look at a map and say, well, it's, one place is here and one place is there, but it's hard to really understand that scale. And so what helps me is if I lay over something I'm really familiar with, a map of something I'm really familiar with, and then I can lay it over the top of another place that I want to visit or I have visited, just to understand how big or small something is. So for example, my older daughter is about to leave for the Netherlands. She's going to live in the Netherlands for a year. And it's a small country. We've both been there. We've all been there before, everyone in our family. But it's really hard to understand the size of it. So I can lay the Netherlands over a map of Lake Michigan, and then you can see what size it is. Or I can lay a map of Lake Michigan over the states on the east coast of the United States, and you can kind of see how big it is. So that gives you a sense of the scale of things. So when I want to go from Minnesota to Ludington, Michigan, where my mother lives, because it's on Lake Michigan, I have 3 choices for how to get there. One is that I can drive north through the upper peninsula of Michigan. So that's a very rural area, that drive all the way down. There's not going to be an interstate highway that has 2 or 3 lanes where you can drive 65, 75 miles an hour. They're smaller highways, and any traffic backup is going to, be a problem. It's not a route that I would drive in the winter because you get a lot of snow. So I can drive that way through the upper peninsula of Michigan and then down along the shores of Lake Michigan until I get to Ludington, which is about halfway down. Lake Michigan is kind of elongated. It's about halfway down. The other choice is to drive south through Wisconsin and around Chicago, which is at the base of Lake Michigan, and then up Lake Michigan to get to Ludington. But the third option, if it's between like May and early October, is to drive straight across Wisconsin to Manitowoc and then take the SS Badger, which is a car ferry, and it's a historic landmark now. It was the last remaining car ferry, and a man who had worked on car ferries in his youth didn't want to see it go away, and he bought it. He had it refurbished, and rather than transporting train cars, using it as a shipping type of ferry, it carries tourists across. So you can bring your car on there, or your motorcycle or semi-truck. All kinds of things can be transported across, and it's about a 4-hour ride across Lake Michigan. And when you're out in the middle of it, it just looks like you're in the ocean. You can't see the shores. The car ferry goes across probably the narrowest part of the lake, and it's 60 miles. The lake is 100 and some miles long, I think, but it's a large lake. If the winds are bad, you can get pretty high waves. It was beautifully flat when we went across. Beautiful day. It's probably the most pleasant crossing I've ever had on there, just because it was just such a perfect day outside. And then on the way back, it was a little more overcast and a little windier, but it's a very large, stable ferry, and you don't get seasick or anything. So it's really nice. But because there's such large lakes and there are large shipping vessels, as well as a lot of boats and other watercraft, they have lighthouses along the shore. And there are 3 of them near where my mother and Al lived. There were a couple of days where we need to get out of the house just to get some exercise. So one day we went down to Ludington Beach, right near downtown, and we took a walk out to the end of the pier to that lighthouse and then walked back. So it was probably a 1.5 miles, possibly round trip, walking from the parking lot to the end of the pier and back. A couple days later, we decided to go see a different lighthouse. So we went up to Ludington State Park and we walked to that lighthouse. It was an hour, or not an hour, it was 1.5 miles each way. And so I'm going to just show you what that's like. The Lake Michigan has a lot of sand dunes, and like they're huge. There's like a huge sand dune area called Sleeping Bear Dunes, and they shift a lot. It's just unbelievable. They're like mountains, but this part is they're a lot lower, and but it's very sandy, and it's a really different sort of landscape than I tend to see in other places. So it was really interesting walk up to the lighthouse. So I'm just going to let you see that. What did they call this? The Four Dunes?
Four dunes, yeah.
As in F-O-R-E, not as in not aft. And then over there, it's just the forest. But over there is the dune, and behind it is Lake Michigan. The lighthouse is in the distance. Let's see what happens if I try to zoom in. Can we see it? It's probably not any clearer. It's way up there. Here's the lighthouse.
To the lighthouse.
This is either Big Sable Point Lighthouse or Big Sable Point Lighthouse. Since it's across the mitten from Ausable, I'm inclined to think it's Big Sable, but called Grand Point Ausable by French explorers, which probably means it's Grand Point Ausable. This is the lake to which the lighthouse was meant to protect, the shoreline anyway.
Slid it to the back, go tip over, and tip it on that. Went just a bit, and then I go.
So that was my vacation. Before I went on vacation, I was talking about my daughter who's about to go to the Netherlands to be an au pair, and we were picking out things for the family's new baby that was just going to be born. And she wanted something that had animals on it. And she picked out this pattern called Welcome to the Flock. It's got a little hat, and then it's got a little cardigan that has a yoke, and the hat has sheep, and then the cardigan has sheep across here. So I finished the hat. Now, originally I went to the yarnery in St. Paul and got this yarn by the neighborhood fiber company. They didn't have the green. The pattern calls for a kind of a spring green color, and there's no reason you can't use a different color than that. But what I found was I really liked the idea of the spring green because it was kind of like the little lambs are out in the fields. But I got this green yarn, which is a darker green yarn, and I was going to use that instead. I thought, well, this will be fine. And then I realized the sheep are black and natural, and the black faces and legs of the sheep I thought were going to be too, I think I just felt like there wasn't enough contrast. But I really like this yarn, and I knew that they didn't have I didn't have a spring green at the yarnery. So I didn't want to return it because I know I'll use this yarn at some point. So I ordered from the neighborhood yarn company. I ordered the yarn that I would need, and this is a little hat. I have some ends to weave in here, but this is a little hat, and I did make a change. The sheep in the pattern are knit in stockinette. And what I did, I wanted to add a little texture to the sheep. So I knit them in garter stitch, and it's the sheep body is 4 rows long. So the first row of the sheep I knit, then the second row I purled, the second and fourth rows I purled, but the first and third rows I knit. And I did that so that I wouldn't get color blips. then it works out just fine. Now it's a little tricky. There, where the face of the sheep starts, you end up having 3 colors per round. So there are 2 rounds where you have all 3 colors. And I thought, well, this is really interesting because I'm going to be doing this video on how to do strand of color work with 3 or more strands. And I've done it before in different ways, like with some Latvian stuff. This is a different kind of motif than you would find in, say, Fair Isle or Latvian or that tend to be more geometric. And so there were some challenges to that I hadn't thought about. So I'm kind of waiting to do the 3 color strand of color work video until I really do some more exploration, because I'm starting to see how there can really be some real variables to how you might want to approach 3 colors, the things that I just hadn't thought about before. So I will be doing that video at some point, but it might not be right away. So I have started on the sweater, and this is bottom up. So you knit the body first, then you knit the sleeves, and then you join at the underarms, and then you do the yoke at the end. So I'm in the first set of sheep. Now what makes this tricky is that not only do you have 2 rows where there's 3 colors rather than 2 rounds, so then you have to purl across while doing 3 colors at once. But it's only 1 row, and so I've just sat down like, okay, I'm not in a rush. I'm just going to do this row slowly and get through it. And then there's plenty of plain stockinette in solid color that I don't mind for this little bit, doing the sheep in 3 colors. Now, when I was in Michigan, I saw my brother. We drove he's 3 hours from my mom, so we drove 1.5 hours, each of us, in the 2 directions to this tiny little college town that's in the middle of a bunch of farm fields, and got to have dinner with them. And he gave me 2 things. He gave me 2 things. He gave me this field guide. He had seen it. He had been at a fiber festival up near Traverse City, up here, a few months ago, and said, "Oh, do you want this book?" Because I was just learning to spin. And I said, well, I could order it, and I could tell he wanted to read it. So I said, well, go ahead and buy it if you want to read it. And I also mentioned to him that there is a Michigan woolen mill, small mill, like a mini mill, that I thought probably would be at that fiber fair, and they were. And he said, well, do you want any yarn? And I said, well, I have a hat pattern that I think would be really good for you. So if you see yarn you'd like for a hat, you can buy the yarn, just buy 1 skein of it, and then I'll make you the hat. And the hat is an 1898 hat. It's a free pattern. I really like this pattern. It's fun to knit. It's ingeniously structured, and it's very warm. So if you live in a climate like we live in, it's really nice for that. So he brought me this yarn. Now I love this company's yarn. The name of the yarn is called Shepherd's Wool, and it's their worsted weight. The name of the company, I'll put the name of the company on the screen because I can't remember the name of the mill. This particular mill, they've built their own equipment, I believe. And they build mills for small, like people who want to have a mini mill, like a specialty woolen mill. So they build the equipment, and then they teach people how to operate the mill, the whole process for figuring out financially how to do it and how to process all this stuff, which I find very interesting. So they have tons of colors. I've only worked with their solid wool, and my brother picked out this wool. It's a marled yarn, and their worsted weight is a 3-ply yarn. So this is actually 3 colors. It's hard to see the 3rd color, but there is a natural, a kind of a bright medium blue, and then it's either a dark blue or a gray. It's very hard for me to see, but it looks like it's just blue and white. And he handed it to me, and I went, oh. And And it's not because I think it's an ugly yarn, it's because I know how hard it's going to be to knit with marled yarn. And it's just hard to read your stitches. It means that you hide mistakes, but it also means it can be really hard to see where did you do an increase or decrease before. So I've made the band. The way the band is knit is you knit it in garter stitch, and this is actually the midpoint of the midpoint of the strip. You knit something that's about this wide, and then you do increases to make the flap, and then you go straight, and then you go out for the flaps again. You fold it in half. So the midpoint of the flap, you've got these column of slip stitches there. Are they knit on the right side, slipped on the wrong side? I think they're knit on the right side and slipped on the wrong side, and then the rest of it's garter stitch. And so that creates a natural fold line. It kind of looks like I-cord. So then you fold in half, so you've got this double thickness of garter stitch. It's very cushy, it's very warm. And then you pick up stitches around the edge. You pick up one stitch for every garter ridge, and then you knit the rest of the crown up that way. And the idea is that you start with a provisional cast on and then you graft it. Now, if that sounds like a nightmare to you, then you can do a regular cast on and you can seam it. And the seam will be hidden on the inside of the flap, the folded flap. So you're not going to see it in that way. I've made a couple of these before, and I've had trouble with the graft and getting it to line up. And the first time I did, I'd used Judy's Magic Cast On, and then I realized later, oh, the way Judy's Magic Cast On works, it's not really good as a provisional cast on because things would be offset by a stitch. So then the next time I used probably the Turkish Cast On, and things still were offset. And then I realized, oh, you have to do the start different. I realized over time, oh, you also have to do your setup differently when you are grafting the start and end of the same strip together. I did some swatching ahead of time, and this time I got a graft that's really nice, and this middle point where the slip stitches are, I got those lined up perfectly. There's no half stitch offset. So I think at some point I'm going to do some videos on this, because I don't normally do technique videos on a specific pattern that isn't something that I designed, but this is a really popular pattern, and I think it's an interesting way to approach it. It's just to think about how to make this so it's completely invisible. So I'll be finishing this up and probably do a video on that particular starting provisional cast on and graft situation at some point in the future. Yesterday was the first day of the Minnesota State Fair, and I was there. I'll be going again on Tuesday. Yesterday I was there. The Minnesota Knitters Guild has a demonstration booth in the Creative Activities building on the first day of the fair. The Weavers Guild is there all day, every day of the fair. So on Tuesday, I'm volunteering at their demo booth, and I'll be spinning for 4 hours in the demo booth for the Weavers Guild. But yesterday was the Knitters Guild, and it was a lot of fun. So one of the things we do at the booth is we give out information about the Minnesota Knitters Guild and invite people to come to a meeting, because you don't have to be a member to come to most meetings. The September meeting is a great one to come to, because people who entered things in the fair can bring them to the meeting. They can show them off. You as just viewers of the meeting can then actually see things up close that you might have seen through the cases, and they can talk a little bit about the pattern and the yarn that they use, and they can read the comments they got, and they can share whether or not they got a ribbon and what ribbon they got. So it's really a fun, interesting thing. It's a way to see a lot of really great knitting and up close, and a huge variety of it. So it's a lot of fun. So that was one of the things that we did at the booth. And the other thing we did was we could demonstrate knitting. We could teach people who don't know how to knit but have been interested in it. And that was a lot of fun. Now, I taught beginning knitting for a number of years at the shop where I used to teach. But the last year or two that the shop was open, I said, okay, I'm done teaching beginning knitting. I'm just going to teach clinics and techniques and maybe a pattern class or two. But I was done teaching beginning knitting. And I hadn't done any like yarn shop type teaching now for 2 years since the shop closed. So it was a lot, that was a lot of fun to do some one-on-one instruction and help people learn to knit and help them and watch them like catch on and like get it finally. There was one woman there, I was like, is she a ringer? Like she had been wanting to learn to knit and was a little afraid of it, which always surprises me because I'm like, well, it's not brain surgery. You're not going to kill anybody if you do something wrong. But she just, she had a little trepidation about it. And so I was standing next to her and I was explaining to her and I, showing her what to do. And I told her the little children's poem of in through the front door, run around the back, out through the window, off jumps Jack. That works if you handle the yarn in your right hand. So I was explaining it to her and then I was just kind of, showed her. And then I said, conceptually, I told her what to do. Now, for most people, if I explain conceptually what you're doing with knitting, where you're using the working needle basically as a hook that you're just reaching through a hole to grab the yarn and pull it back through, that doesn't make any sense to most people. I've had one student prior to this woman who had struggled, and she had struggled to learn to knit and was having terrible time and had had a teacher who said, well, you should be catching on by now, and made her cry, and she just really wanted to learn to knit. And that student that I'd had previously, I explained to her conceptually what to do because she kept missing a step. Like there's kind of 4 steps to creating a stitch, and she would miss one. I said, well, here's conceptually what you're trying to do. She went, oh, and then within 5 minutes, she's hardly looking at her knitting and she was talking to everyone. She could just do it. It was amazing. She's a very spatial woman. So this woman who was at the booth yesterday, I showed her, I explained conceptually what to do, and she could just do it. Like, it was amazing. And she just did it. And I couldn't believe it. So I'm like, okay, I think you're ready to learn how to purl. And I said, now with purling, it's sort of like the opposite. You have to the yarn has to be in front. I showed her how to bring it under the needles, never over. And I explained, instead of reaching through the front to grab the yarn that's in the back and pull it through, you're reaching from the back through, to grab the yarn that's in the front to pull it through. And I showed her, I said, you still have to wrap it in the same direction. And she just did it. Like she could just do it. And and she said, well, I work in a medical facility and I had to learn to tie medical restraints that are easy to pull out, but that the patients, can't undo. So she said, I am used to like wrapping around and coming through. So she did have that experience, but I was like so excited to have somebody because I'm like, you are going to go so fast. And she's like, well, what would be a good first project for a beginner, like a scarf? And I'm like, no, that's 6 feet of boring sameness. And I said, do something small. I gave her a link to this pattern I'd created for my beginning students that called Easy Fingerless Mitts, because each mitt takes about 25 grams of yarn, and it's very quick, and it teaches you how to read a pattern and switch between knits and purls, twice in a row, but not every row, and you're not having to do ribbing where you're back and forth, back and forth. So it's a nice project for a beginner. And I said, you can do that. You don't even have to finish the pair of mitts, but I said, you're going to want to, you're going to do so well, you're going to want to do this next thing and that thing and that thing. If you have to get through 200 grams of worsted weight wool to make a boring scarf, you're just not going to want to finish. I'm projecting my own personality on her, but I could just tell she was going to catch on so quick. And it was so much fun to get a new knitter excited and turned on about knitting. So I hadn't had that in person in a while. So that was really fun. So before I did my shift at the booth, I went through, and I'm going to have to go through when I go back on Tuesday and really look at everything without filming it, because I wanted to film it all and I wasn't really absorbing what I was looking at. I was focused on framing and getting things in the shot. So I'm going to have to go back and really look at everything. But I thought I would show you guys sort of the quantity of knitting. Now, I filmed all the big cases that have knitting in them. There is always more knitting than this in the creative activities building, because sometimes in other creative activities like sewing or something, they'll have a mannequin post and then they'll use one of the knitted hats or something. And sometimes it can be a prize winner and sometimes it won't be something that won a ribbon. You can never tell. But that was the majority of the knitting that I found. Some of the cases have themes to them. Like there was one case that had this gorgeous, just beautiful quilt. It was just amazing. It had a sea life theme to it. And so they used other little creative things. There were some crocheted things, and there were just a bunch of different things that were like sea creatures that they put in the case with it. There was another case that was all red and white things from all different kinds of creative activities. There was one that had a lot of Christmas themed things to it. It's just really, really interesting. I did not by any means film anywhere near all of the stuff, just mostly knitting and then a few of the other things. So I thought I would just leave you with that at the end of this video, and for your personal enjoyment. And if you live anywhere near the Twin Cities, I would encourage you to come to the fair at some point this year. So that's it for this week's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Oh my gosh, he's right here. Oh, he's right here, honey. Right here.
Do I recognize you from the guild? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I wanted to come and look at everything first. I'm doing a shift at
Oh, me too.
12:45.
Mine's 10:45. It's kind of funny, I couldn't find my tam. I knew I didn't get a ribbon, but it ended up in the girl blue ribbon case anyway. It's the Kate Davies neat.
Oh, pretty. And it didn't get a ribbon?
No.
Aww.
But I'm okay with it being in a blue ribbon case.
Yeah, at least people will see it and you can find it. It's not crammed under everything else.
Oh, Susan Reed.
I was just looking to see if I could just spot something by Susan.
Yeah, that's one of
Oh, okay. Usually there's a sweater that's very long in the body, and you can tell.
Last year she had one way in the back because she entered it in the seniors category.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Guys, Becky got first place right here, Tom. Tom, this is your leg. Tom, Becky got first place. Becky got first place.
Oh, wow, that's pretty.
Yeah, it is.
That's gorgeous.
Becky got first place. There's some mittens here that got first place.
I've seen. Really?
Yeah, I made in a hat.
Making your way here? You're fine. Do without doing the reflection in here.